From a defabricated solar-powered garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominick. On today's episode, the top 10 reasons you should probably not pet that wild boar. And now, the podcast host who steers clear of wild boars because he believes they are actually gargoyles, Pete Dominick.
That's Pete Co. nailing it as he always does. I've been told I myself look like a gargoyle, not so long ago, by a very funny person. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Stand Up. I've got two really great guests and awesome conversations with both of them. First, we'll hear from Middle East expert Aaron David Miller, who joined me to talk about what is going on in Israel. Did you know that the people there have been protesting in the streets for 14 weeks? If you did, you're better than me. I did not realize how much of a movement there was against this, as it's being called, judicial coup, where the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is going to try to get the courts to take over everything. That is my unbelievably rudimentary, amateur, elementary way of explaining what has happened in Israel. Anyway, Aaron David Miller is awesome as always, and I think we learn a lot from his conversation. A little clip from CNN setting it up before that. And also, Michael Cohen is back. Former columnist at the Boston Globe, former State Department speechwriter, author, analyst, and commentator. Michael Cohen of truthandconsequences.substack.com joins me to talk about why the Republican Party is the reason we have all of this gun violence and more, about what happened the other day in Tennessee, which it's still really very difficult to talk about, think about, hear anything about, at least for me. I don't know about you. I've been struggling with this one, and they always get me in different ways in terms of how I pay attention to them. Sometimes you just look away. You just look away. You just can't. It's too much. It's too hard to think about the victims and their families and imagining what they must be going through and how you would deal with it if it was your life, your family, your kids. It's too much. We are not made to be able to manage this kind of suffering, in my mind. I don't know. I don't know what I just said. We're not made to manage it. I think I'm reacting to that idea, that famous quote that says, God will never give you anything more than you can handle. Comedian Tig Notaro had a very funny joke about that years ago when she was diagnosed with breast cancer and her girlfriend she's in a relationship with for a long time left her. It was too much. And that idea that God won't give you anything that you can't handle. No. There's a lot of things you can't handle, and you break down, you snap, you lose it, you can't handle it. It's too much. That happens. It happens to me, and sometimes you need to shut it down. You need to talk to somebody. You need to write, read, meditate, exercise, go into the woods, go onto the lake, go up the mountain, do whatever it is that you can to come back to living, to come back to searching for purpose and for joy and to get away from suffering. So that's, I guess, what I meant by that. So yeah, there's definitely a dark cloud over our nation and the world. And yeah, I've been struggling. Yesterday, I saw this tweet from our friend Amy Westerfeld, who was on the show last week, the host of the Drilled podcast. She wrote on Twitter, sometimes you just need a good cry about the state of the world so you can get back to fighting for better. Yeah, Amy. Charge me back up, because this is the work that I do, talking to you every day on this podcast. I've got to try to find a way to get back to the work to fight for better. It gives me huge purpose. It makes me feel reward. I'm challenged by it. It makes me feel alive to talk about the state of the world. Let's talk about the state of our lives. so that we can get back to fighting for better. So I highly appreciated that tweet from Amy, and it kind of brought me back because I was definitely struggling yesterday. Took most of the day off and was outside and doing other work and not related to the news, let's just say. And in fact, I got a text from an old friend, just a random text that was as thoughtful as could be. It made me feel so good to hear from him, who I became friends with as freshmen in colleges. And then I got a call from another friend who I was not expecting to be calling and asking for my personal advice on his marriage. And that felt good. Both of those things yesterday were what I reflected back on at the end of my day, which made my day really wonderful just to hear from my friends and to hear from you, many of which have become my friends. And so I'll keep trying to make these connections with you and with each other, because for me, it helps me get through and often thrive because of those friendships. So most of the time I'm doing pretty darn good, but all of us, as a result of this shooting and the other daily shootings in this country, have a hard time, and that makes you good. It makes you good. It means you care. It means you feel. It means you're a human being and loving and thoughtful and empathic or empathetic. I just don't know. I just don't know, and I will never know the difference between those two words. But I know that's what you are. So we got to do it. You got to get back to the work. We got to get to talking about it. If you could take it, I'll be here for you. I take a day off from time to time away from the news to get away from it, get out in the woods, which I will today with my friend and our pups, and I'm really looking forward to that. It's 4 a.m. here in New York State at the end of March. That's where I am. I thank you for listening, whatever time, wherever you are. I so appreciate you and so grateful for your subscription. If you're helping support my work here, this is what I do for a living. Standupwithpete@gmail.com is my email. Reach out anytime with ideas or just to connect, like Troy Feltus did about Kevin Richburg. How about this? He reached out. Kevin was on the show on Monday. Friend of mine, friend of the show, scientist, farmer, super thoughtful guy. He wrote, Pete, wow, what an amazing human being Kevin Richburg is. Great interview. That guy's extremely interesting to listen to and is very accomplished. Troy. Yeah, Troy. I know. Thank you very much for reaching out. Always great to hear from you, buddy. Say hi to the family. But yeah, I mean, if I do anything decently or well, which is what makes this podcast great, it's I find real good people to talk to, and many of them are in the listening audience. So if you know somebody or are somebody who you think would make an interesting conversation that folks would learn something from, reach out. Yeah, Kevin will be back. We're going to try to do a series of interviews helping you deal with climate and growing things and living on the land. I mean, Kevin can talk about anything, certainly politics and life and relationships and world traveler. So I will definitely be talking with Kevin a lot more. All right, well, I've got 2 great guests, 2 great interviews to share with you. But before I do, just one clip that I definitely want to get on. I saw this. This is probably one of the best contextual, smartest things I've seen regarding gun violence and gun laws in the U.S. And it was from Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC last night, because they dug into the archives. They found this clip of former Supreme Court Justice Warren Burger. And I think that Lawrence O'Donnell's commentary around it is really, really good. It's about 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and I think it's definitely worth it. I'd never heard it, and I think after all this violence and gun violence for years and years, the fact that I hadn't heard this, so I talked about it with Dr. Siegel, Professor Siegel. Forgive me, I just gave him a PhD. People do that from time to time. It's always an accident, and then I did it. I've talked about it with others, but I've never actually heard this video myself, so I thought maybe you hadn't either. And, of course, Lawrence O'Donnell's commentary is great. Here it is.
There was a time when Republicans were no more in favor of gun rights than Democrats were. But then Republican campaign pollsters found the sliver of the electorate that cares obsessively about guns and added them to the sliver of the electorate that cares obsessively about stopping all abortions, and added them to the electorate that hates taxes and liberals. And that became their only formula for winning elections. Conservative Republican President Richard Nixon chose the conservative Warren Burger to be Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, knowing that Warren Burger would steer the court in a more conservative direction, which he did. But the one thing that Warren Burger could not abide was the fetishism about the Second Amendment that he saw beginning to develop when he was Chief Justice. Here is Chief Justice Burger in 1991, 5 years after he retired from the Supreme Court.
If I were writing the Bill of Rights now, there wouldn't be any such thing as the Second Amendment.
Which says?
That a well-regulated militia being necessary for the defense of the state, the people's rights to bear arms. This has been the subject of one of the greatest pieces of fraud, I repeat the word fraud, on the American public by special interest groups that I have ever seen in my lifetime. Now just look at those words. There are only 3 lines to that amendment. A well-regulated militia. If the militia, which was going to be the state army, was going to be well-regulated, why shouldn't 16 and 17 and 18 or any other age persons be regulated in the use of arms the way an automobile is regulated?
The Republican fraud perpetrated by Presidents George W. Bush and Donald Trump and Republican members of the House of Representatives and Republican senators will continue to get children and teachers murdered in their classrooms by legally purchased AR-15s because it is the Republican Party policy to make sure that America's mass murderers are the very best equipped mass murderers in the world. No school in the world has seen a better equipped mass murderer enter that school than the mass murderer who entered that school in Nashville yesterday carrying the weapons that Republicans like Lindsey Graham fetishize.
Now, I'm not sure why he specifically picked on Lindsey Graham. I'm missing that. I mean, Lindsey Graham's terrible, but they were showing clips during that commentary on MSNBC of different Republican congressmen handing out or holding, including George Santos, the AR-15 pin that they were all wearing around the time that Kevin McCarthy was sworn in, I think, or maybe after. But it doesn't matter when. The fact is, they were all wearing a pin of a gun of war. They were wearing that pin. They were wearing that gun. And then several someone's used the gun. Now, I don't know if it's dumber to wear the pin after that weapon had been used to kill children or then just before another person used that weapon to kill children, which is so hard to say in here. But the fact that they're wearing a pin of an AR-15 is so bizarre and sick and really hard, I think, to understand how someone could do that. How a congressperson could do it. It'd be one thing if you owned a gun store, that guy's, or just a gun lover. But the idea that you would wear that pin, as opposed to say any other kind of pin or something that would say that you care about the Second Amendment or whatever bullshit you want, just so grotesque and really, really tough. The other very tough thing is the narrative that is forming around trans people being violent, or the reason for violence being that they are trans or that they are taking male hormones. You're seeing that narrative form, and it's super dangerous and irresponsible and sick and evil and wrong. But that's what is happening on the far right, the extreme right, the media right. I'm going to play a Tucker Carlson clip for you. It's short, but I think it matters to try to hear what he is saying in short bursts so you know just how crazy it is. I might play one a week. It's just to give you perspective. I think he's the most watched person on television. So 2 days after a trans woman went into a school and shot these poor people, terrorists, if you will, Tucker Carlson went ahead and used it in his monologue to declare that transgender people are the, quote, natural enemy of Christianity because they claim dominion over nature. That, like, if someone pitched that idea, this is what my monologue, this is what my thesis is going to be. Your professor, your producer, your editor would be like, that's insane. It's stupid. It's not, no, but you're not going to do that. That would be wildly irresponsible to say, nope, not over at Fox News. They're like, oh, that's a good one. Go with it.
Trans movement is the mirror image of Christianity and therefore its natural enemy. In Christianity, the price of admission is admitting that you're not God. Christians openly concede that they have no real power over anything, and for that matter, very little personal virtue. They will tell you to your face that they are sinful and helpless and basically absurd. They're not embarrassed about any of this. They brag about it. That saved a wretch like me, goes the most famous Christian hymn ever written in English. The trans movement takes the opposite view. Trans ideology claims dominion over nature itself. We can change the identity we were born with, they will tell you with wild-eyed certainty. Christians can never agree with this statement because these are powers they believe God alone possesses. That unwillingness to agree, that failure to acknowledge a trans person's dominion over nature, incites and enrages some in the trans community. People who believe they're God can't stand to be reminded that they're not. So Christianity and transgender orthodoxy are wholly incompatible theologies. They can never be reconciled. They are on a collision course with each other. One side is likely to draw blood before the other side.
That is super, super dangerous. He is just setting up a war. He's just creating two sides of a war as if you can't be Christian and trans. That's what he's saying. He's saying, clearly making a binary of two groups of people that are at war, at odds with each other, and could never be compatible. Ooh, is that some dangerous shit, which is why I play it. I want people to understand it. Of course, you can be a Christian and a trans person. And I mean, who should care? Who should care? Is there not enough with just trying to figure out what you're eating that might be causing joint pain? Folks, I'm here to talk with you. No. I was going to go into a live read for calcium. All right. Well, listen. That's really bad, and I wanted to share it for that reason. And it also makes me want to reach out to and talk with trans people who are also Christian trans people, and find out how to heal that rift before it gets too deep. And hopefully he doesn't pound on that every night, but he probably will, because he doesn't have anything else to do. And it's making him like $30 million a year or something. So let's move on. I was going to go with Aaron David Miller first, but I want to start off with Michael Cohen, and then we'll get to the CNN recap of what's going on in Israel and my great conversation with Aaron David Miller. If you want, you could skip over Michael Cohen, where I do talk about the gun violence and politics and more, and get to Aaron David Miller. That begins at about 55 minutes into the show, starting with a CNN recap of what's going on in Israel and the Middle East. But otherwise, I want to bring to you right now my friend Michael Cohen, no, not Trump's former lawyer, a former columnist for the Boston Globe on national politics and foreign affairs. He was there starting in 2014. He's also the author of American Maelstrom, the 1968 election, and the politics of division, as well as Live from the Campaign Trail, the greatest presidential campaign speeches of the 20th century and how they shaped modern America. Also the co-author with Mike Kosenko of Clear and Present Safety, The World Has Never Been Better and Why That Matters to Americans. They wrote several years ago. Michael has been published in dozens of news outlets, a regular columnist at The Guardian, Foreign Policy, World Politics Review, and more. He's a regular contributor to MSNBC and The Daily Beast. He's been a lecturer at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs, and you should go support him at truthandcons.substack.com. I'm a paid subscriber. Love following him on Twitter at SpeechBoy71. Let's get him back on here right now.
I think it's your face that's uneven.
We're live with Michael Cohen, everybody. Oh, sorry. Did we get that?
Hi, Pete.
Happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
How was it?
Thank you. It was very nice, actually. Lovely birthday this year.
And also, you went to Portugal.
Turning 39 can be a little stressful.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty excited about it, though.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to be, you're getting close to 40, and I'm sure the angst.
Yeah, exactly.
Really setting in. Yeah. You took your kids to Portugal as well.
I did.
I know this because I'm a
exciting trip.
I'm a subscriber to truthandcons.substack.com, and I know this. Is there anything you want to share? Did you learn anything? Did you go there to do heroin? It's legal.
Now you tell me. Jesus Christ, what the hell? I had no idea.
Tell me something about Portugal.
It's beautiful, cheap. The food is great. People are awesome and nice. It was great. We had a fantastic time. Kids loved it. I loved it. It was a lot of fun.
Oh,
I highly recommend going.
Happy to hear that. I've got a lot that I want to ask you about, talk with you about. You've been writing a lot of good stuff, interesting stuff, no shortage of issues to talk about. But let's talk about what happened in Tennessee with this horrific shooting. And you have been reacting to it like everybody else, reacting to the reactions to it. This one's a little different because this person identified as a trans woman. And I feel like we're hearing a quite different conversation after this shooting. How do you want to react to that? I don't.
It doesn't matter. I mean, my basic view about these gun deaths, gun shootings, mass shootings, and it's been the same for years. The motive doesn't matter. And we focus on the motive, and, it's secondary in importance to the fact that what all of these shootings have in common is a gun. Quite obviously. And what we should be talking about are guns, not the motives, because the motives don't matter. Because without easy access to guns, people wouldn't be able to commit these crimes. And so I don't really care what the motive is. I don't care the identity of the person who did it. What I care about is that this person who appears to have had some mental health issues, whose parents want to keep guns away from her, I believe her, I'm not absolutely sure on the pronoun, was able to get 7, I believe, guns, all purchased legally in the state of Tennessee. There's no red flag law in Tennessee that would have possibly prevented her from getting them. There's, of course, no kind of background check or way to prevent her from getting these. And she got them, and she killed 3 kids and 3 adults and killed herself and was killed by the police. And it's a tragedy. And it's a tragedy that would be that's easily preventable if we just didn't allow such easy access to guns. So I don't care about her. I don't care why she did it. I don't care about that she's trans or not trans or whatever she identifies herself. I care about the fact that she had a gun and she was committing this crime because of it.
I understand that, but you are already hearing reactions and things like trans terrorism is trending on social media. Marjorie Taylor Greene saying, "Don't tell me that this is that this is because that she was taking male hormones. That's why." And I fear that the trans community is already under so much threat. They're taking their own lives at frighteningly high rates. And I feel like this is a reaction to them being marginalized and threatened. Not the shooting necessarily. Who knows what her motive was? But it's crazy to blame the victims and say that they are then the aggressors. But I do see that playing out. And to me, that's a dangerous narrative. No?
Well, she's not a victim. I mean, I don't know if I'd go that far. But
I'm not saying the shooter's a victim. I'm saying that trans people have been victimized, and now they are being seen as terrorists or a threat.
Right, which is, of course, just a political statement these folks are making. And I think the thing that, you're right, there is, Tennessee passed a law this month banning drag shows, banning them in the presence of children. And that law was passed to protect children, Pete. Meanwhile, that same person who pushed that law is now co-sponsoring a bill to lower the age to purchase an assault weapon from 21 from 20, I believe, to 18. So that war on trans people is going to continue in right-wing America, red America, because there is I see some political upside in waging a war against trans people. But I don't really want to spend my time talking about this. I guess I'd say that I expect that from Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's the asshole, and other Republicans. I expect that from, because that's the way they operate. Many of them do. But I think that I don't want to talk about that because I don't think it's relevant. And I think what's relevant, for your listeners and for those of us who care about this issue is that once again, it's just one more indictment of us as a nation and our ability to deal with gun violence. And, I wrote this piece about it. You look what happened in Texas last year in Uvalde. A lot of people, a lot of gun control advocates said, let's get rid of Greg Abbott. He's as big a friend of the NRA as there is. He won by 11 points. Until Americans make this a priority, you're going to keep voting Republicans to office who represent the most extreme section of the country on guns. I mean, 10-20% of people in this country don't want, even less than that probably, don't want background checks, don't want flag laws, don't want assault weapons bans. Republicans speak for them because they're the loudest voices and they vote in Republican primaries. And so that's where we are as a country. And I really hate on the gun issue. So I've written about gun issue for, 12, 15 years. And I've given the same piece 1,000 times.
Yeah.
And I'll keep making the same argument. Motive, we get caught up in discussion about motive and who the killer was. And we don't spend the time talking about the fact that all of these crimes are possible because of access to guns. The motive doesn't matter. What matters is that people are able to carry them out.
So often the gun violence is suicidal. And that too is an issue that people that are mentally ill, that are upset, especially adolescents, have easy access to guns. To lower the age, to make it even younger, where someone is probably dealing with even more issues, sounds absolutely crazy. But I mean, a third, I think, of gun violence or gun death in America is suicide. And we don't talk about that nearly enough.
We focus on mass shootings for obvious reasons, but the reality is what you just said, that most gun violence is committed by is suicide. It's often domestic violence related. I wrote about this case in my newsletter. It's even painful to talk about it. A man in South Carolina, estranged husband, broke into his ex-wife's home, killed her boyfriend, their 3 children, his 3 children, shot them and killed himself. That's a mass shooting. I'm going to talk about that as much because it's a domestic violence incident. It's not like a terror incident, I guess, in the same way that the shooting in Nashville was. But this stuff happens every single day in America. And I'm not exaggerating. Go look at the mass violence, the mass shooting indexes. You can find them Google them rather easily. There are mass shootings in America and people are wounded or shot and killed every single day, virtually every single day. And that, by the way, doesn't even get into suicides or people who shoot their spouse or whatever, or an accident.
Or gang violence.
Some of the gang violence does, because sometimes it involves a lot of people getting wounded. But yes, that also, if it's just a single person being killed, we're talking about a mass shooting like that. But suicide is a huge part of the problem. And one of the weird things about America has a very high suicide rate because we have what's called a high completion rate for suicide, which people who try to commit suicide are more able to complete the task. And sorry for the language, but that's the way we kind of talk about it. In other countries, because of access to guns. Suicides are often cry for help. They're often not intended to be fatal. Sometimes people take pills or they might do something that would hurt themselves, but not to kill themselves. With a gun, there's no coming back. And people who try to kill themselves with guns the success rate, terrible expression, is over 90%.
What's wrong with someone taking a Christmas photo with their family where they themselves and their kids even are holding guns? What's wrong with that?
Well, I don't celebrate Christmas, so I can't answer the question as a Christian, but as a human being, it's fucking appalling. And I don't, somebody mentioned this on Twitter that they're come from a gun-owning family, they don't get it. I don't come from a gun-owning family. I fired one gun in my life. It was whatever. I don't have any interest in holding guns, owning guns, being around guns. I find guns gross. I don't understand when people fetishize it. The idea that you take a Christmas picture, Pete, a Christmas picture with a fucking assault rifle, I don't have the words for it, Pete. I don't understand it, and I don't understand it. That's all I'm going to say. I don't understand it. It's bizarre to me. It's gross. I'll leave it at that.
Very Christian.
Sorry for all the profanity today, but I'm a little bit annoyed.
That's fine. It's a Christian nationalist thing, I think.
more than anything else.
I don't think it is. It's a political thing. These jokers think that like somehow having a gun is like a signal to their right-wing supporters. Like, I'm just like you. I'm a mouth-breathing dipshit gun owner, And I mean, I don't. What's even more appalling when people do it is there are people out there who find that appealing, who say, "Oh, he's just like me. He has his 12-year-old holding an assault rifle. He's just like me." You know what? You want to own a gun? I don't give a shit. I do give a shit. You want to own you want to go hunting Bambi? I think it's gross, but whatever. It's legal. But assault rifle, giving it to your kids. What is wrong with people? Sorry, I'm in a state today.
No,
I'm full of piss and vinegar today.
No, I like I'm laughing kind of because you're really, I think, verbalizing in a really perfectly correct emotional way what most of us are feeling. It's good. You also write that over the past few years, gun control activists have seen notable legislative success, both on state and federal levels, but ultimately gun violence, like every other issue in America, is deeply politicized. Until the political incentives change, the carnage from gun violence will continue, and only voters can make that happen. And I just wanted to underscore that because in states like Connecticut and New York, we have passed laws as a result of this violence. And so when people say, and that's a result of activism, it's a result of voting people and donating to campaigns to people. And so that I think that matters a lot, right?
Yes, it does. Look what happened in Michigan. Michigan just passed major gun control legislation. Why? Because Democrats are in charge in Michigan. They took over the state Senate and the House, the governorship, and they passed major gun control legislation. That's a big deal. But you're going to still have places like Tennessee that, I mean, I don't know if you saw these clips from these Congress in Tennessee. Oh, there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah, I saw that one.
Yeah. I'm a lawmaker, but I can't pass a law to stop gun violence.
Well, it's the same guy who just last week passed a law to protect kids from drag shows.
Well, as I said, the guy who's pushing for to lower the age for, carrying an assault rifle, or concealed carry, I should say, is the guy passing a ban against drag shows because he wants to protect children. He wants to protect children, Pete. He wants to keep drag queens away from them.
Leading cause of death in America is drag queens killing kids in libraries and schools.
It's a little known fact. The leading cause of death in America for children is seeing a drag show and one's head exploding.
You'd think it'd be covered more just for the clicks. But no.
Actually, I'm checking my notes. I'm wrong. The number one cause of death for children is gun violence. Then drag shows.
Are you sure?
Crazy as it may sound.
What about...
And here's the crazier thing, too. No other Western country, no other industrialized country is even the top 5 as far as cause of death for children. Gun homicide is not even the top 5. Gun death, gun violence. But in America, we're number 1, USA.
Let me ask you about a few other things that you've either commented on or written about and just get your reaction to. I saw this in Truth and Consequences, a movie about Ruby Bridges, who at the age of 6 integrated New Orleans public schools in the 1960s, was removed from the curriculum because a parent complained that it, quote, might result in students learning that white people hated black people. You're right. This is one of the weirdly awful things about Florida's new educational laws. If a single parent complains about inappropriate content in a book or film, it can be removed pending review. Never before has a piece of legislation empowered so many Karens. So this seems like a real flashpoint. Ruby Bridges removed?
6 years old.
Removed
because a parent complained. I love this idea, by the way, that parental rights should predominate. So if 99 parents think, that's fine, good idea to show the kids, the one Karen's like, no, I don't want kids to see that. The one parent gets to decide what happens. It's like this thing about the principal is fired because the art teacher showed Michelangelo's David. Apparently, like 2 parents complained. And I saw this interview with the head of the school board saying, well, if parents' rights is what matters. What about the parents who want their kids to see that? Do they count? I mean, here's the thing. I will say this. This is a golden age for Karens. A golden age for Karens. I mean, I
don't like the word Karens. It makes it sound like it's only women and it's kind of sexist.
Karen and Chads. The golden age for Karen and Chads.
Thank you.
Sorry to any Karens and Chads who are listening. It if you're a complaining parent, you have so much power, especially in Florida. Florida's have enough problems. They don't have enough issues to worry about. They have gators on meth. They got all kinds of stuff going on there. Now they've got empowered Karens and Chads able to basically decide what students learn in public schools.
One of my favorite moments of my career, and it wasn't really part of my career because I was just at a board meeting last year, and a parent went up and said something about, you're teaching my kid is white, coming home and is ashamed of his whiteness or being white. A parent said that. And I got to go on the microphone next, and I said, if your child comes home and they tell you that they're ashamed of being white, that isn't the school's or the teacher's fault. That's a parenting issue. You should be able to handle that as a parent. You should be able to sit down with them and have a brief conversation, talk them out of that feeling. And if you can't, and you're not a good parent. And then, of course, they threatened my family, but it was worth it.
Well, there you go.
So you've been writing a lot about Ron.
I've written a lot recently. I've been on a roll recently.
Yeah, I've been writing a lot, but you've had a few pieces at your Substack and even a Daily Beast piece about Ron DeSantis. DeSantis versus Trump. Do you want to do quick work with that? Is there much to say?
Well, let me say this, because I'm going to do a little self-promotion here. You mentioned my newsletter, Truth and Consequences, truthandcons.com. I wrote a piece, I'd say, when was it? 8 months ago, in July of 2022, basically arguing that Ron DeSantis, I wasn't sold on Ron DeSantis, and saying I didn't think that he had the chops to win the Republican nomination. And I want to just say for the record that so far that article looks pretty good right now. I have been a DeSantis tractor for a while, not just because I don't like him, and I think he's a uber authoritarian, kind of a jerk. I just think as a politician, I'm not very impressed with him. I know he won in Florida, but Florida is America's, sick joke. I mean, it really isn't a state that we can take too seriously as far as their political choices. So I don't take too seriously doing well in Florida. I think on a national level, here's what I think. He has run, he's made a very bad decision, which is to run for president in 2024. And somebody asked me a couple of days ago, if you were advising Stan, what would you tell him to do? And I would say, don't run. That's what he should do. Don't run. Because he's not going to win. And even if he does win, he can't win the presidency, because Donald Trump, if he somehow were defeated by DeSantis, would spend pretty much all of his energy and time trying to undermine DeSantis, because he'd rather, I think, Biden win than DeSantis do what he couldn't do, which is beat Joe Biden. So I never understood the rationale for running, or why he thought he could win, or why he thought he could out-Trump Trump. But you're seeing right now that he can't do it. And the thing he's tried to do, his strategy very clearly is to identify as closely as possible Trump's policies, but try to make the affirmative case that I'm the guy who can win the election. And that's just too nuanced of an argument for the Republican electorate.
Yeah. He can't win the election because Donald Trump, if he didn't get the nomination, would run as an independent and split the vote.
Or just undermine him consistently.
Also,
but one or the other. One or the other.
My friend Jay Alcovan, very funny comedian, best Trump impersonator, has great analysis on this, as he does many things. He lives inside Trump's head, and he talks about Trump and DeSantis on a debate stage and how it would just be an absolute massacre. How Trump would just be like, look at him. I mean, look at him.
He'd call him, I judged this joke like 5 months ago, he'd call him Ronnie Fat Fat, and the whole thing would be over in like 2 minutes.
Exactly. The whole thing would be
Ron. A meatball Ron, and that's what he'll say. And then everyone will think it's funny, and everyone will laugh, and DeSantis will look there like a deer in the headlights, and it's over.
You're exactly right. I don't think you need to write about it anymore. Because you just put it to bed. It'll be over in 2 seconds. Ronnie Fat, goodbye.
Ronnie Fat. He's going to call him Ronnie Fat, and the whole thing is
Speaking
over.
of which, apparently Chris Christie is making rumblings to run.
Did you see what Christie said? He said the other day, only reason I supported Donald Trump because I thought he could beat Hillary Clinton. And I'm like, you lying sack of shit. That is so not what happened. You endorsed Trump because you thought Trump was going to win the nomination, and you wanted to be on the inside of the guy who was going to win. Yeah. Don't forget, Chris Christie was the first major politician to endorse Donald Trump in 2016. And it was a huge boon for Trump when he did it.
Yeah, and he did get a job. He ran the transition.
the New Hampshire primary, he single-handedly destroyed Marco Rubio on a debate stage, which also was very helpful to Trump. So give me a break, man.
Oh,
Seriously.
Chris Christie took out Rubio for Trump? I didn't remember that.
Well,
Helped
that's
him.
the speculation. I mean, maybe he's took him out because it was fun to take him out, and I'm sure that was fun to take him out.
Well, he's considering a 2024 run right now.
Yeah, good luck with that. Good luck with that.
You think he'd make the same joke, Trump, about Chris Christie as he did Ron DeSantis? He would be like...
He'd make even more jokes about
He'd be
Chris.
like, you've got Ronnie, fat hair, and then, I mean, I don't even know, next to Chris Christie,
Crisco
though.
over there.
Chris Crisco. And then it looks like Chris Christie ate Nikki Haley. I'm not, and then he wins. That's it. It's over.
He ate Marco Rubio. He filleted him on the debate stage, and then he ate him for dinner with a nice bottle of Chianti. That's what I'll say. That's too much for Trump. That's too advanced.
Oh, God. All right. Well,
but here's the point. I just want to get back to this. I think this is like the crucial thing here. You know, DeSantis has played this game of like, I'm not going to get in the muck with Trump. Yeah, good luck with that. And he's also like, I'm not going to announce until May. Good luck with that. The problem is that here's the issue, and I think it's actually an unsolvable problem, is that the only way to win the Republican nomination legitimately is you have to prove your mettle. You have to be willing to take a punch from Trump and punch back, right? Not about like knocking him down a peg. It's like Republican voters are all a bunch of alpha males, even the women, and they want a Republican nominee who is a tough guy, who's strong, who has resolve, who's not going to who's going to say things that no one else will say. So you have to be tough. You have to be strong. And the problem is he can't do that without alienating Trump's supporters, right? That's why he's not doing it. And also doesn't want to get, on Trump's bad side. I don't think he scored the circle on that one. I really don't. Because I think at the end of the day, this is why I think he shouldn't have run. Because there really is no way to out Trump. And you've seen this with these prosecutions. He is more popular. Think about how sick the Republican Party is. Think about how absolutely sick the Republican Party is. That Trump, on the cusp of being indicted, has made him more popular, not less, more.
Speaking of the indictment, and it's a great point. Speaking of the indictments, that was what I was going to ask you last. You've written about this as well. You've written about the Manhattan DA's case, Alvin Bragg, and your curiosity about why he would be doing that, which is a really interesting piece. I hadn't seen somebody really quite put it that way. But what do you make of the whole series of inquiries into the president? We thought this was the former president. We thought this was going to come down a couple weeks, 2 weeks ago now almost, because, of course, Trump predicted it. But you rightly wrote when that happened, you said no reason to believe the guy. You said it. You said it right there.
Why do we think Trump's going to be indicted? Because Trump said it. There's no other evidence than Trump saying it. I expect there's a lot of evidence he will be indicted in New York, and I expect that he probably will be. I expect he'll probably be indicted in Georgia. I expect he might be indicted in the federal cases. I think all of those are going to help him in the Republican nomination fight. They're not going to help in the general election. I mean, I think that's the thing that I think people need to realize. That I was just talking about this issue with somebody a little while ago. Like, think about how ludicrous this is. Like, he could be under multiple indictments while being a Republican candidate for president, and theoretically could become president while facing multiple indictments and trials. I don't like making predictions. I think the chances that a candidate who's been indicted multiple times to get to president is about 1,000,000 to 1, even with Donald Trump. I know we should make predictions about Trump. I just think it's not going to happen if he's indicted. I think Republican nomination, though, is like a slam dunk.
How weird is it how parallel Bibi Netanyahu's life and times and crimes are, and what he's doing in Israel, and to some extent not caring about Israel. Trump doesn't care about America. They only care about their own necks and trying to get away with it. Anything to say about what's happened over there in the last couple of years?
It's funny. I was just having a conversation with somebody about this. I was thinking of writing about it, that I find Bibi's behavior odd. And here's why. He's usually a pretty careful and canny politician, right? I mean, he's not impulsive and lazy and, not very bright.
He wants
Trump.
to end the investigations into him.
He does. And that's what I think is actually causing him to make bad political decisions, right? I think he he's smarter than this. He's really good at pushing up to the line, but backing down when he sees sort of.
Well, don't you think he had to appease the far right who put him in power?
He does, but here's the part I don't understand completely. If he doesn't go forward with the judicial overhaul and they topple the government, they're not going to win the next election. The polls are out this week are terrible for Bibi. And if I were Bibi, I would just go to them and say, topple the government, you're going to lose your cabinet position. And they might say, well, hey, you know what? You might go to jail. And I think that's the kind of that's the reason why he's not doing that. And I think it is causing him to make political mistakes. I think that's the bottom line. He's a smart politician. He's awful. I'm not a fan, but he's a smart politician, and he's figured out a way to win a lot of elections in Israel. But I think his desperation to stay out of jail, which I understand, I could understand why he might feel that way, is causing him to make political mistakes. And the idea, what kind of brought things to a head this week was he fired the defense minister for going to London and speaking out against the judicial overhaul bill. How did he not think that was going to cause a big outroar? And it did. I mean, people were uproar, I should say. It caused a huge uproar. People were in the streets, as they have been, but even more vociferously. Yeah. So I just think the interesting thing about this is I think that he's a pretty smart politician, pretty canny operator, but he has really faltered on this one. And I think whether it costs him, I don't know. And the thing is that he said he's going to delay the overhaul, but it's not dead yet. I will say, can I say one thing, though, about this?
Yeah.
I think this is actually like a lovely, shining moment for democracy in Israel.
Oh, I talked about that with Aaron David Miller, who's on today's episode as well. So please go ahead. Okay. Yeah, please go ahead. A general strike that went on for weeks that was peaceful, that actually was successful, something we were just talking about whether we could ever have that in the United States of America. But go ahead, say whatever you want to say about that.
Well, I just think, there's a lot of things to say about it. I mean, I think, first of all, what's really undermined this bill is the public outrage about it. So I think that's, and that says something about demonstrations have gone on for weeks. You're talking about something like 6% of the country has marched in demonstrations. That's an enormous number of people. But I think the other thing about it is that, Israel has had democratic backsliding in the past couple of years. I think people have sort of made this argument that for a lot of Israelis, being Jewish, being a Zionist state is more important than being democratic. I think what you've seen is that the democratic adherence to democracy is stronger than I think we thought it was.
Yeah.
And I think, it's been almost a little surprising to me that the democratic character of the state matters to Israelis. And it matters in a way that they see it in danger and they're trying something about it. Now, certain people are going to come in and say, well, but the Palestinians, and I would sort of say, well, they don't look at that issue the same way. And that's a complicated issue. I'm not going to get into it right here. But I would say that it's a good sign for Israel and for democracy in general that they are willing to look past other elements that make them patriotic or make them Israeli and because democracy is not a Jewish or Zionist characteristic. It's not. It's like something that's kind of been, that Israel has adopted and accepted, and it clearly has become part of the culture in a way that I think is, if you try to undermine it, you're going to pay a political price for it. I mean, it's doing that now.
Yes, it seems to be a core tenet, and
more than I think a lot of people thought. In fact, a little more than I thought, to be honest.
Yeah, it would seem that just the few anecdotes I've heard from Israelis who've talked to the media about it, it's like some of the people who moved to Israel who weren't necessarily born there moved there because what they believed was the health of their democracy.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the Russians who moved there came from a authoritarian state.
Right.
So I think it's a hopeful sign. And look, I'll just say, I mean, I know you can say that Americans don't do the same thing, but like, how many people? 4 million people marched on the Women's March in 2017.
That was big. Right? I was there. Yeah. Well, in DC.
So I think I'm Americans. And look, last 3 elections, Democrats have done pretty well, in part because of fear of Trump. But I think Americans have nothing to be ashamed of as far as standing up for democracy.
If you say so. It is Michael Cohen.
Wow.
It
really?
Is. I mean, yeah, I agree with that. We saved democracy so far. I mean, a lot of people don't. I guess I hedge on because a lot of people don't understand or know anything about history. They have no idea what it means to be democracy. They have no idea about the wars that we fought over it, and they'll stand and they'll salute the flag and they'll honor the troops, not knowing about fighting for democracy, not knowing that ours is dwindling and that they're supporting the people who are trying to take it from us. So I feel like a lot of people don't even know what it is or how we got here or how we've tried to spread it or, except for when someone comes home and, brings them a pizza and someone else takes all of it and they want to have a say. Then they understand what democracy is. They just don't know what it.
I'm sorry. You lost me in the pizza thing.
Well, that's your fault. Everybody listening heard exactly what I was talking about. They knew exactly. I could predict people's reactions, and they're like, "Oh, Pete's going to go into a perfect metaphor about pizza and democracy. Here it is." And then Michael missed it. That's his fault.
You feeling okay?
I think I screwed it up.
Can we talk about Succession at all? I know we have to go soon, but did you watch Succession?
No, I don't talk about TV shows here because people don't. Not everybody watches them. I watched 2 seasons of it.
It's the best show on TV. That's all I'm going to say.
I stopped watching it.
Okay, fine. You'd like it. It's very funny.
After 2 seasons, I found it funny. I really enjoyed it. I don't know why I stopped watching it. Sometimes stop watching shows.
Yeah, okay.
You know what I won't stop watching? Or haven't stopped watching? I watched the Ted Lasso, of course. And I watched The Last of Us.
Oh, I haven't seen that show.
I never have watched any zombie show except for that movie.
I don't like the zombie shows.
I don't like zombie shows. I watched the World War Z because Brad Pitt's in it and Swoon. But I also feel similarly about Pedro Pascal. I'm not as attracted to him, but I do find his acting, and I find he's in everything now. He's even Boba Fett or whatever that guy is.
I liked him in Narcos.
He's great. Yeah, he's great. Well, all right. I'll go pick up Succession. I don't know where I stopped watching it, but given the fact that I'm always interested. Are you reading anything?
I'm actually reading a biography of Ulysses S. Grant right now.
Oh, the one by
not the one by Chernow, the one by Ronald White. Someone left it in my lobby. We have a sharing book thing library in our lobby, and someone left it there, and I picked it up, and I just found it fascinating.
Wow, I thought that everybody would just be reading Ron Chernow's one.
That wasn't free. No one left that at my lobby.
Well, I got a whole bunch of books. I'm just going to drop them off in your librage. Your lobby.
I might read them. It's very possible.
Thank you very well. I'm sorry. They all just got canceled. All the books I had. I had them. And then they disappeared. They've been banned. I'm so sorry. One of them was Tiki Tiki Tembo No Sorembo. Really? Wow. Huh.
That's one of the books you're reading, really.
Very sensitive. I appreciate you. Thank you very much for joining me. It's always a pleasure, sir.
Always a pleasure, my friend.
All right, there he goes, Michael Cohen at SpeechBoy71, truthandcons.substack.com. Go support him. Go let him know that you heard him here on the show. He's very active on the Twitter as well, and I really do like reading his Substack. And some people don't like Michael. Some people are critical of Michael when he's on, but that is to be expected with the very strong points of view and opinions that he takes here and in print for most of his career. We should get him on, and you could challenge him if you want to at one of our hangouts. I'm sure he'd be glad to join us. That's tomorrow night, by the way. I hope you'll hang out with me. If you're a paid subscriber, it's the best time of the week. We rejuvenate and we revive each other from all of the horror that we see in the news and are dealing with it in our own lives, and it brings us joy and alleviates suffering, and it's fun. It's always fun. So sign up now. You need it. That's what you're supposed to say. You're supposed to tell somebody that they need a thing. It'll make you feel better, more attractive, sexier, and it will get you more friends. It will get you more friends, actually, I think, to hang out. A lot of people have made friends there through this community, and that certainly is one of the most wonderful things that has resulted in my being fired like a dog from SiriusXM. I'm just kidding. I wouldn't have this without them, that's for damn sure. Without Sirius, I wouldn't have the podcast and the community that we created, so I'll always be grateful and not be bitter, and that is for real. I'm not just saying that. All right, let's get to Aaron David Miller. Aaron David Miller is, of course, one of the most respected Middle East analysts, global affairs analysts in the country. He's been working in both government and media and academia for a long, long time. You can see him as a global affairs analyst on CNN. His articles have appeared in the New York Times, Washington Post, Politico, Foreign Policy, USA Today, and, of course, CNN.com. He's a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, focusing on U.S. foreign policy. He hosts a regular show there where he interviews some of the smartest folks out there on his program now that you should get, Carnegie Connects, wherever you get your podcasts. He's on Twitter. He is online. You should follow him on all the things. Look up the show notes for all things Aaron David Miller. Got a Ph.D. in Middle East and U.S. diplomatic history from the University of Michigan. He worked at the State Department on Republicans and Democrats between 1978 and 2003. And so he's a credible dude. We have become good friends over the years. We had a lot of fun in this interview, even though we talk about such serious things as always. But here's CNN, a CNN report setting up what happened in Israel. This is just a couple minutes, and then we'll jump into my conversation with Aaron David Miller about that subject and learn more about the news and what's happening in the world around us.
A political crisis and now a potential security crisis on the streets of Israel, as the country was brought to a standstill by the largest general strike in Israeli history, sparked by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's plan to weaken the Supreme Court and his firing of the country's defense minister for speaking out against the overhaul. Fiery protests erupted Sunday and grew Monday, with demonstrators descending on Jerusalem from all over Israel, chanting for democracy as they gathered en masse in front of the country's Supreme Court and outside Israel's parliament, the Knesset, nearby.
These changes to the judiciary in Israel will be the most significant since the country's founding in 1948. And at their core, they would give the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, and therefore whatever parties and politicians are in power, more control over the judiciary, from how and who the judges are who are to be selected, to even the ability to overturn certain Supreme Court decisions. Now, critics of these reforms fear that it would destroy the independence of the Israeli judiciary, they would hurt minority rights, and it would also hurt human rights in Israel, from everything from freedom of speech and expression to freedom of religion.
On Monday, flights were halted and Israel ports stopped work, alongside universities, embassies abroad, malls, and even McDonald's. The leader of Israel's largest union demanded the historic general strike to stop what he called this judicial revolution, this craziness. It seemed to have had the intended effect.
Out of the desire to prevent a rift in the nation, I decided to suspend the second and third reading of the law in this session of the Knesset to give time to try and reach a broad agreement.
For Netanyahu, this may be more than just a political setback. Critics say the overhaul will help Netanyahu in his ongoing corruption trial, a charge he denies. In a Saturday evening interview with British journalist Piers Morgan, Netanyahu denied he was pushing for autocratic rule.
To try to paint me as some third world autocrat is ridiculous. I believe in the balance. I'm a classic Democrat with a small d. I don't want to get into trouble with my American friends, but I'm a classic believer in the balance between the three branches of government. That's what ensures democracy, and it's been thrown off balance in Israel. We have to bring it back.
Before his speech to the nation on Monday, he acknowledged the precarious situation the country is in, as some right-wing groups began calling for counter-protests, tweeting, "I call on all the demonstrators in Jerusalem, on the right and the left, to behave responsibly and not to act violently. We are brotherly people." With the country in chaos, there are fears now that this divisiveness could still lead to bloodshed.
And while the general strike was lifted once the suspension was announced, that was also praised by the U.S. State Department. Opposition leaders have been a bit more circumspect, taking more of a wait-and-see approach, whether there will actually be proper negotiations on a compromise reform that they want to be mediated by the Israeli president.
All right. Thank you very much, CNN, for setting us up. Now it's time to get to my guest, Aaron David Miller. And I left on just the part before I officially hit record. I usually edit this out, but I thought this was fun because Aaron David Miller and I were talking about coffee, and I told him I run on Dunkin' Donuts, and he said this.
In the Tony Washington area, it's hard to find a convenient Dunkin'.
Oh, is that right? Oh, I did not realize.
In Maine, no problem. New England, just you can't throw a stone without it in a Dunkin'.
No, in New England, if a Dunkin' Donuts runs out of an important ingredient, they walk next door to the other Dunkin'.
Exactly. It is amazing.
Doesn't seem like a great business idea, but it's working. Yeah. All right. Yes, imbibe away. I'll be imbibing. And I've already given you an introduction, and I'm ready to record if you're ready to record.
I am.
All right. I'm going to hit record on that one. Here we go. All right. There he is. I've got him. Thank you so much for joining me today, sir. I have a lot to ask you. Aaron David Miller, welcome back. The legend is here, folks.
Pete, thanks so much. I mean, I'll say to your listeners, they're fortunate to have you.
Oh, that's
truly.
Very
it's less guests, frankly, and more the host. I've always believed that. Since I do my own podcast, Audio Carnegie Connects. Last week, we interviewed Steve Hadley and Tom Donilon, two former national security advisors, one Republican, one Democrat. They actually admire and respect one another, and it shows. I mean, I'm old, but I just hope at some point I'll live to see such a thing happen again.
Well, you also interviewed Ambassador Victoria Nuland, who is the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, to talk about the Biden administration's strategy in Ukraine. And that was a fascinating episode. You are getting great guests over there at Carnegie Connects, and I'm left with the crumbs and have to talk to you.
Yeah, but I get to talk to you.
Well, let's...
Do you remember when we first encountered one another?
Maybe not first. I remember many of our encounters, though, because...
You were at CNN. I think.
Okay. Makes sense.
It was the early years.
I always remember that I just wanted to get closer to you because I imagine you smelled like mahogany. Let's get to it. Okay. I don't know where to start with you, though, because when we're talking about the Middle East, you never know where to start. We could start 20 years ago or thousands of years ago, but I think we have to talk about Netanyahu's tenure, because what has happened there with this general strike and then him backing down, I don't know if you're surprised, and I don't know where to start with talking about where Israel has gotten internally.
Right. I'd only make an observation, an American takeaway, and I understand that Israel and the U.S. are very different countries. We have 330 million people. We have non-predatory neighbors to our north and south and fish to our east and west. They're a small country, 9 million people. 2 million Palestinian citizens of Israel, and then they have an occupation, of course, over most of the West Bank. Not Gaza anymore, although they do influence what goes in and out there. And I have to say, after watching what the Israelis did for the last 13 weeks, which were protests and demonstrations which were incredibly peaceful, incredibly intense, and representing a broad spectrum of Israeli society. In a way, we have indictments, we have impeachments, we have investigations. But if you want to safeguard your democracy, if you want to prevent democratic backsliding, or in this case, stop not judicial reform, stop a judicial coup.
Yeah.
And sometimes you not only have to vote, you have to vote with your feet. And that's what the Israelis did. And they managed, frankly, it's in stress tests. They're not done yet. Either is Netanyahu or his coalition with these reforms. So,
I didn't realize they had been out there for 13 weeks. And I think the most important point is the broad spectrum of backgrounds and political ideologies that these Israelis had that were protesting. But my friend Peter Coyote, who is one of my favorite thinkers, has been calling, he's now almost 80 years old, has been calling for a general strike in the United States of America for anything from gun crime to campaign finance. But you don't see that happening with 330 million people in the U.S. You see the L.A. strikes with the teachers' unions and right. Other unions and even the railroads, but what they did in Israel feels like we couldn't accomplish anymore here. I don't know.
Partly because we can't find a national moment. In other words, that's really part of I was thinking back when I was 12. Adjourned early from Woodbury Junior High School because they had come over the loudspeaker and informed us that Jack Kennedy had been shot in Dallas. And I remember walking home. I mean, it was a national moment that all Americans felt in some way, shape, or form. Nothing seems to be able to produce that anymore. Not what happened in Tennessee, not good things. So I worry greatly. But at any rate,
well, it's a minority ideology when it comes to something like guns. Like the vast majority of Americans, the vast majority of Americans support all kinds of different laws, and whether or not it would have an effect, we could argue. But in Israel, it's really interesting to talk about that broad spectrum, but also what has happened and how important is it that Netanyahu backed down with these reforms? Where do you want to pick up?
I think that's where we need to start. Maybe a word or two about the nature, why these reforms are what I would say is the judicial coup. I mean, why was Netanyahu interested in this? And there's a sort of confluence of interest. You know, he's on trial for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. 3 years now in a Jerusalem district court presided over by 3 judges, right? Not jury, judges. So he has an interest in creating a situation where the Supreme Court and the judiciary genuinely loses its independence so he could figure out a way to undermine his own ongoing trial. The ultra-Orthodox in the coalition want a controlled judiciary because they want a law passed which will exempt their constituencies permanently from military service. These are the ultra-Orthodox. And the religious Zionists, with their 2...
They want to get out of military service to certain ultra-Orthodox.
They want to end conscription, right?
Yeah, right.
And the religious Zionists, the 2 ministers who are Jewish supremacists and racists, frankly, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, they want to weaken judiciary so they can pass legislation that will essentially annex most of the West Bank to Israel in everything but name. So there's a perfect storm of people who want to do this. But the gatekeepers in Israeli society, at all levels from all sectors, the business elite, university, the military reservists who are critically important in this, stood up and spoke out. And the Minister of Defense, fired by Netanyahu, and by the way, he still remains in his job. It'll be interesting to see exactly how that plays out.
Netanyahu, you think Netanyahu's in danger, his role as prime minister?
Yeah, not immediately, because these guys and ladies get nice automobiles, they get big offices, they get budgets, they get prestige. Being part of a coalition is not something you want to depart easily. Remember that the average length of an Israeli government since independence is 1.8 years. This government's only been around for 3 months.
Right.
I suspect it's not going to collapse anytime soon.
Okay.
Question is how badly has Benjamin Netanyahu been weakened? And that, I think, clearly he has. If elections were held today, the recent public poll suggests that Benny Gantz, former Minister of Defense, would in fact win. All right? But we're not going to have elections in Israel, it seems to me, anytime soon.
Talk to me about what were Israelis unified on? What were they concerned about? There's all this talk of democracy dying in Israel, and that's as a result of the judicial branch basically taking over. It sounds like they were going to have their courts run the country, and their legislature wouldn't have as much power, if I were to really simplify it. And we've obviously seen what happens when that's the case.
Well, every judiciary in the world, every Supreme Court probably is in need of reform. But what Netanyahu and his government wanted to do was to rearrange the balance of power between the parliament and the judiciary. Unlike our system, where you have a bicameral legislature, a Senate and a House, you have a written constitution, and you have 3 branches of government, all which have shared and separated powers. The only break on governmental authority in Israel is an independent judiciary. I think what drove Israelis out into the streets, though, was more than just the issue of the judiciary. I think what they feared, rightly in my judgment, borrowing a word from John Meacham or Joe Biden, in this case, that the soul of Israel was going to be undermined and degraded, that most Israelis have a vision of themselves and their country as a pro-Western, humanistic, pluralistic society, democratic, however flawed a democracy Israel is, and it is flawed, there's no question, as are we. That's, I think, what they feared the most, and that's what brought so many Israelis out into the streets. You know, back to the America trope for just a sec, I wonder if you polled most Americans, whether or not you could actually have a common conception in the minds of most Americans of what America is supposed to be in their own minds.
Right. That's a great point.
As you pointed out with the teacher strike in L.A., we become atomized and a country of interests.
That's a really, really great point. I always wonder about that as well, because we're such a diverse country. How do we even define American culture? It's so diverse. And let's look at the response from the U.S. to this. Just hours before we started taping here, I think news broke that the White House has offered Benjamin Netanyahu an invitation. Come on over here. You wrote about that. Biden can't live with Netanyahu or without him. Why did the White House invite Benjamin Netanyahu? Why does the timing matter? And what are you talking about living with or without him?
Well, I think that if Joe Biden had his druthers, he would basically say to Netanyahu, don't call me or bother me.
Lose my number.
Until I've won my reelection, which I haven't even announced my intention to run, but I'm going to run, and I don't want to hear from you. Don't bother me. Don't bother me with this judicial stuff. Israel's a democracy. Keep your hands off of that, and don't create a crisis with the Palestinians. That's going to be a big problem between us. The real problem we have is Iran, and I don't have an answer to that, and we're going to have to figure out a way to work together to try to address this problem. And right now, I'm not sure there is a way to do that. So I think it's certainly good politics for Netanyahu, for Biden to at least extend an invitation in principle. There's no date, by the way. This was announced by the U.S. ambassador in Israel. No date for the visit. But I think they when I say he can't live with him or without him, I think Israel is in Biden's mind a very important ally. I think he looks at Netanyahu and shakes his head and says, this guy's a con man. Biden is in love with Netanyahu. He's like Clinton, and he's the presidential model, by the way, for Biden, not Barack Obama. That the relationship with Israel is deeply ingrained in both Clinton and Biden's political and emotional DNA. Right? So he can't ignore Netanyahu. The Republican Party has set itself up as the Israel right or wrong party. I haven't done the research on this, but I wonder if you looked for the past 3 months since January, when this judicial reform, aka coup, was first introduced, whether or not you could find a single Republican in the House or Senate that said anything negative about this issue. Mitch McConnell, several weeks ago, more now, basically said this is an internal Israeli matter. It's not up for us to decide.
Wow.
So they're the go-to party, and Biden knows that he can't afford to ignore the Israelis. And on Iran, he's got to figure out a way to cooperate so that a way can be found, I think, to avoid a preemptive Israeli strike and to make an American strike unnecessary, unless the Iranians decide that they're going to actually make a nuclear weapon, which apparently they have not yet decided to do. So that I think is the reason. You can't live with him. He's going to be a pain. It's going to be a testy relationship, but it is Israel after all. He's the prime minister. Politically, emotionally, and from a policy point of view, we got to have ties. So I call it a passive-aggressive response. I do not believe this administration wants a major public fight with Netanyahu. Presidents don't like to do that. Why? I'm busy. I mean, I got Putin in Ukraine. I got Xi rising. What do I need this for? It's a messy, awkward distraction.
What about getting back to Israel and Netanyahu? This judicial coup, as you call it, and many others do as well, has failed. Does that mean they won't try this or something similar again to consolidate power in the religious right in Israel?
It doesn't. That's a great point. I mean, the deal apparently was to delay this until after the Knesset summer recess, and it's certainly possible if no compromise could be found. And the president of Israel has been working for the last several months to construct such a compromise. It's not been able to do it. And I think it's very difficult to imagine a compromise that would satisfy the hundreds of thousands of Israelis who week after week went out into the streets on one hand and Netanyahu's coalition on the other. So he could try to do this, and it could be done very quickly. He has a majority in the Knesset. But if he does it, Pete, what's going to happen is what almost happened. Had he unilaterally pushed this through Parliament, the Supreme Court would have declared this, well, Israel doesn't have a written constitution. They would have declared it unconstitutional. At that point, the entire system, the structure of the country would have had to make a decision. Do we listen to the government, or do we listen to the courts? Interestingly enough, I think Tel Aviv University ran a tabletop exercise simulating how the security chiefs, the head of Shin Bet, the head of Mossad, the chief of staff of the army, 3 out of the 4 of them said they would have sided with the courts, which would have meant a breakdown in governance in Israel. Now, they dodged that bullet because Netanyahu, as you rightly said, pulled back. He could try it again, but I suspect he won't. And therein lies the problem with keeping his coalition together. One last point. Stymied on the judiciary, however, I think he's going to pay his coalition members in what I call the annexationist coin. You're going to see a lot of ramping up of a lot of things in the West Bank and in and around Jerusalem.
Interesting, right?
Another problem.
He's got to appease them somehow as a result of this failing, and so watch out what's next. Yeah, that's a great point. I do just want to go back just real quick and just underscore, I think it's so important when we see in the history of struggle, of threat, people coming together and coming out in the streets peacefully. You mentioned that, and I do want to say that we should be celebrating people from different backgrounds accomplishing this, because every analyst out there, when talking about this, would saying, as I'm sure you were, I'm not sure what's going to happen. But what happened was as a result of people coming together. And I feel like we should just underscore that more and celebrate it when we see it happen there, Ukraine, anywhere in the world.
It's so true. If you could bottle this and have people imbibe it, citizen responsibility, the obligations of citizenship, including not just voting, but peaceful protest, it'd be extraordinary. And that's the lesson, I think. That's the takeaway.
Right.
We'll have our own stress test, Pete, in the months and years ahead. And we passed a big one in 2022. We'll see how it goes.
I feel like it's ongoing.
Yeah. And, the other thing is Israel's going to turn 75 next month. It's interesting to point out that neither the borders nor the identity of the state of Israel, 75 years after independence, have yet been settled. Now, if you went back to 1851, 75 years after our independence, you could argue the same thing. Neither the borders of the United States nor its identity as a nation had yet to be determined. Now, you could say, God, Israelis are in trouble. Or you can say, young nation, still hope, still possibility that with the right decisions, with the right leadership, both in terms of promoting democracy and peace with their neighbors, Palestinian neighbors, that future could be a bright one. Or alternatively, it could get darker.
I think a lot about the similarities being religious extremists, fundamentalists pushing the country further off of the cliff. Christian nationalism here, Jewish supremacists there, and I always feel like it's a much smaller minority of actual people, but they have a huge amount of power and influence in each country. Do you think that's a fair point to make?
Absolutely. And the other thing, and I won't mention the name, but there are 2 politicians in the Middle East. One is Mohammed bin Salman, a.k.a. MBS, putative future king of Saudi Arabia, and Benjamin Netanyahu, who are hoping and wishing for the return of, let's see, what's his name again? The predecessor of this administration, or his Republican avatar, right?
Right.
So the connections that you make are all too real.
Well, somebody you didn't
relevant.
You didn't include him because I think the title was politicians, I think, in the Middle East. But obviously, there's one more really powerful person that would love to have Voldemort back. And that is, of course, the authoritarian leader in Russia. And I wanted to end by just asking you anything. You've been interviewing some really smart people, including, as I mentioned, Victoria Nuland. And you also talked to Russia military analyst Michael Kaufman. It's been just over a year now. And I wonder, give me any takeaway that you want from anybody you've talked to or your own observation and following of this and understanding of history.
If you talk to Michael Kaufman, and I think he's probably one of the best analysts of the Russian military, I asked him whether or not he could envision anything on the battlefield other than this long slog in which neither side is able to achieve much. And he said he could. So you'll have to watch the spring counteroffensive on the part of Ukraine. But let's be clear about something, Pete. The Ukrainians are facing a Russia, which is the largest country in the world, the 9th or 10th largest economy, a country that has 4,450 plus nuclear warheads. The notion that somehow Russia will be defeated and will sort of limp away, never to emerge as a consequential factor in European politics or in global politics, I think, frankly, is an illusion. The real question, and this is the administration's logic, can you tilt the battlefield in Ukraine's favor so that Vladimir Putin will understand that the long war is not his interest, and you produce some kind of negotiation that leads to fill in the blank here? I mean, if you mention anything other than the total liberation of all Ukrainian territory, including Crimea, you get hammered by people who call you an appeaser and weak. But the reality, I think, is something akin, much closer to North and South Korea.
Yeah.
Where you have an end to the conflict, or an end to this phase of the war, but not in a way that can possibly satisfy both parties. And that's going to be hard to sell and hard to accommodate.
Thank you so much for talking to me. I always appreciate it. You make yourself available to us. We always learn a lot, and we are very grateful. The great Aaron David Miller, sir, I will let you get back to whatever you were probably chopping wood, I would imagine, or you were probably writing an essay with a quill and an inkwell.
I actually do longhand. And Pete, it's great seeing you in the shed, which is a wonderful, wonderful space.
It really is. Thank you so much, sir.
Best to your family, and we'll talk soon.
Likewise.
There he goes, everybody. Aaron David Miller. Isn't he great? I like talking to him a lot. That was enjoyable. We had some fun at each other's expenses. Well, not really. I mean, that was not like we're taking the piss out. I was hanging out with Aaron David Miller. Took the piss out of him. That's something to say. Come on. Sophisticated diplomat. And I hope that you appreciated it and liked it as much as I did. Love talking to him. Love talking to Michael Cohen. Love talking to you. Reach out. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic is where you go to sign up for a paid subscription, and then you get an email from me every day with a picture of vitamin N. Hashtag vitamin N nature photos that are submitted by other listeners in their travels, from their homes, on their hikes, their walks, whatever. And so send away. I need that vitamin N. It's a good time to get out. It's the mud season up in New England, they say, but it's spring. Spring is springing, and I want to see your photos. So send them over, bumblebees. Those are those of you who listen right to the end. You're very loyal listeners, and I'm loyal to you. Thank you, guys. I will see you tomorrow night, hopefully at the Hangout. If you are a subscriber, come join us. Always fun. And thank you again to Aaron David Miller, Michael Cohen, Odessa's son, who's on spring break, by the way. Also, Pete Coe and John Carroll with the song and the intro, or the intro and the song. I think I said it wrong. And let's do it, everybody. Have a great day. Love ya. Bye-bye.
things start making sense and you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town, just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it than now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up, got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up, people got the power. Stand up. Come on, 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 come on. Stand up.